Okay. Well, wow, it's great to have so many people here today. Just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Cheri Brown. I serve as the Director of Development and Membership Engagement for the North Carolina Advocates for Justice, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our CLE this afternoon. Just a couple notes of housekeeping. Everybody was muted on the way into the call, and I just ask that you continue to monitor that so that we can make sure we have as few interruptions with our presenters today. And also that today's call is being recorded so that we will be able to reference this great information that we're going to receive today. And finally, I would like to be one of the first to thank our sponsors for putting on today's program, and the Chief Justice Commission on Professionalism and our partners at Lawyers Mutual. And so to thank them that today could not be possible without them. And then actually, finally, if everybody would use the chat function as we would normally get an opportunity to network together, but use the chat function to introduce yourself, who you are, your area of practice, and from where that you're zooming, so that we can get the full depth and breadth of our geography as well as our areas of practice, and get a chance to see one another over the chat, and that would be fantastic. So at this time, I am going to turn it over to Mel Wright, who serves as the Executive Director for the Chief Justice Commission on Professionalism. Mel?
Thank you very much, Trudy. Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be with you today. This is a terrific program that has been put together, and I hope you all enjoy it. We're excited about the number who have signed up. And I wanted you to know that in the chat room, there should be bios of the speakers. And as a result, I will not be going into the credentials of all of our speakers. We have some wonderful speakers. So just so you'll know, you can go there to find their bios, and I thank you all for being here. It is my honor to first introduce the Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, the Honorable Cheri Beasley, who is going to do a little bit of an introduction about the program, and to thank you for being here. So Chief Justice, I'll turn it to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mel, and thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you so much to Isaac Leonards and David Henson for your willingness to be partners in this really awesome opportunity for the CLE today. I also want to thank Julie Beavers and Dr. Julie Wayne and Nana Asante Smith and Cole Phelps and Allison Mullins and our special guest, Dana Cutler from Kansas City, Missouri. I understand that we will certainly have wonderful presentations from all of these folks, and I'm just so grateful for their willingness to participate. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. It means so much, and I think the fact that there are so many of us who've come together today in this way certainly validates the fact that this CLE is timely, that we all will walk away better and having been validated in our feelings around this period of time and some of the challenges that we're all facing moving through this pandemic. And so I'm so thankful that everybody has come together today. As we think about what professionalism really is and all of the many facets of our lives that are comprised of professionalism, it's certainly collegiality and competence and promptness and tact. But increasingly, we also know that it is so much more. It's cultural competence and empathy and courage and leadership for all of us. I'm so excited about the progress that our profession has made, all of us coming together. I'm excited also about the fact that lawyers and judges have reached out to me personally since this nation erupted in protest this summer, to say that they specifically themselves wanted to be a part of the progress that we're making in our courts. They are ready to lead the way for their colleagues, as are you. And they also were eager to learn about their own blind spots, to learn about the experiences of other lawyers so that we can all work continually to improve our legal profession and our legal system. I think making progress often means acknowledging some difficult realities. We all know that our law schools are comprised of about 50% women and about 50% men. But we also know that the ratio of women to men in big law firms is much greater. We know that there are fewer women law partners. We know that often women stay in large law firms 2 to 5 years and then leave because law firm policies are difficult for them to navigate with their families and their profession. But I do believe that there is, I think there's more than one silver lining during this pandemic, but one of them certainly has been to see the shift in firm policies. Firms, of course, like the rest of our society, have forced people to be able to work at home, and people have been able to see that everybody can be very effective away from the office. And so I'm hopeful that the changes that we have already begun to see will be lasting and positive changes, which will allow young lawyers, both moms and dads, to keep their careers on track without sacrificing the care for their families. As the number of women has increased in large law firms, I think professionalism requires us to examine the roles that women play and to ensure that those roles are not minimized. Obviously, women make great contributions to our profession, but I think it's important to also make sure that when women are active in the roles as advocates, that they are not minimized in their positions. So often, we know that the research shows us that women often provide the research and support for cases, unless race or gender proves to be an advantage in the case that comes before the court. Often women receive critiques around how they dress, how they talk, how we wear our hair, whether or not we greet the receptionist in the morning. And I think it's important for us all to be cognizant that it's difficult often to be a woman lawyer or a woman of color. And often those folks may be mistaken for administrative staff or personnel or custodial staff. It's amazing the stories that I have heard along the way. And one of the difficulties as we talk about some of the complexities facing our profession and our society right now is that we all are reluctant and find it very difficult to talk about race and to discuss gender. But it really is important that we do more than just get past the incident that's before us and work really hard to make sure that incidents don't continue to happen. And we really can, and we always do in our profession, come together, galvanize, meet the challenges, move forward, and we come out better and stronger on the other side. All of us knows that leadership takes courage, and it takes courage to intercede when we see an act that can be demeaning, even when it is unintentional. We really can be and must be inclusive in our law firms and our law schools and in our courts and in every area of our communities. It's important for us to make diverse hiring decisions because everybody benefits from that. So it takes courage to step outside of the box. It takes courage to do things a little differently in the world. But even before the pandemic, young people were beginning to move our profession in a different direction. And so today, 6 months into the pandemic, I would venture to guess that each and every one of us has seen changes in the way that we practice law and that we hold court. Managing the change at the pace that we've had to confront it in the last 6 months, however, has been exhausting and overwhelming for all of us. So it's important for us to take care of ourselves. Mental health issues are real. And all of us are subject to difficulties around this time. We have a lot on us with families and law practice and courts, serving on many committees and all of our other tasks and duties. We are called upon to lead everywhere. And we have to also realize that Zoom fatigue and virus fatigue are real. And so while there have been benefits to not coming together, we also must realize that our life's pace really is very different. And the fact that we're not gathering in the same way is taking its toll and causing some stresses. I would certainly much rather for us to be together today in person rather than virtually. And it's been difficult, frankly, I think, to be in a place where we don't come together and see each other and have the small talk and talk about each other's children and all the wonderful things that we share as members of this profession. So don't be afraid to rely on those around you and to trust their abilities. Make sure that you're nurturing your relationships, your friendships, your family relationships, and those with your colleagues, and certainly with your clergy, who can certainly offer encouragement and uplift you. Be mindful of your own stress and make sure you check on your colleagues. Be mindful that the North Carolina Bar Association has the Bar Cares program, which all of us may participate in. The North Carolina State Bar has the LAP program. And I hope all of you know that Mel Wright, the Executive Director of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism, has a confidential counseling program. Now, he's not a trained counselor, but it's been amazing how he will work with lawyers to mediate situations with them in their professional life and help them to get back on track. All of these programs are confidential, and I would commend them to you if you or somebody you know is in need. I'm excited about today's CLE. I'm excited about the fact that we've all come together to determine for ourselves that we are indeed guardians of the law, that we will look after each other, and that we must take care of ourselves. It is not indeed selfish to do that. I'm delighted to hear from the speakers today, and I thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Chief Justice. Appreciate you being with us and sharing your thoughts. All so important for us to hear. Next, our next speaker is Julie Beavers, who spoke briefly, but she's going to be introduced again. She is with Lawyers Mutual, that was one of the main sponsors of this event, and we thank them so much for that. And Julie, if you'd like to say a word or two at this point, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mel. I'll keep it brief. On behalf of Lawyers Mutual, we are very happy today to be a part of this important conversation. We know that diversity and work-life issues are very important to the profession. We know that it's impacting our insureds. And so we're just very happy to be a part of this, and that we can come together, hear some great ideas, and hopefully implement some action plans after we leave today. So with that, I'll just step away and say I hope everyone enjoys today's program. And for that, back to you, Mel.
Thanks so much, Julie. The next speakers are particularly important to this program today. And it's because their organizations joined together, and they'll tell you about this agreement that they reached a few months back. But I want to introduce at this point Isaac Lenartz, who is the ethics chair of the North Carolina Association of Defense Lawyers, and David Henson, who is the president of the North Carolina Advocates for Justice. So I'd like to introduce them at this time and have them tell you a little bit about their coming together, which is a monumental event in my mind, and I thank them so much for being here today.
Thanks, Mel. It's great to be here today. This is Isaac Lenartz. On behalf of the NCADA, I'd like to thank Chief Justice Beasley for bringing about this CLE, and Mel Wright for organizing it and bringing us all together. 5.5 months ago, the president of the NCADA, Lash Zimp, and the president of the North Carolina Advocates for Justice, Vernon Sumwalt, issued a joint letter to us, their members. That joint letter acknowledged that these are unprecedented and uncertain times. It called on us each to remember that we have the opportunity and the duty to exemplify professionalism and embody civility, even when, or perhaps especially when, facing extraordinary circumstances. It encouraged us to work together cooperatively and professionally around scheduling, deadlines, hearings, and trials for the good of the justice system and for our clients. And that letter closed with a vision of what we should aspire to during these times. It said that once we're beyond the present crisis, we will want to look back with pride on how we treated one another. We will also want to be able to demonstrate to the courts that we each did our part to help support the judicial system and the integrity of the process. That sentiment and that hope remains as relevant today as it was back in March. and perhaps even more so as the pandemic has continued to spread and disrupt our lives, and as we've encountered and struggled with long-standing racial injustices in a new and fresh way. So I want to offer a couple thoughts. The first is that while these are troubling times and different times, nothing has changed about the fundamental importance of acting with professionalism and embodying civility. Those characteristics have always been important to members of the North Carolina Bar, and they're important to the NCADA. In fact, the NCADA's most prestigious award, the J. Robert Elster Award, is awarded annually to an attorney who exemplifies the highest standards of professionalism, integrity, and ethics, and interacts with everyone in a civil, courteous manner. If you go on the NCADA's website and review the names of past Elster Award recipients, I think you'll agree that they stand in the finest tradition of public service and professionalism. The NCADA has also worked to promote diversity and inclusion through the efforts of a very active diversity committee and a wide range of thoughtful and often quite challenging programming, including recent programs that have addressed implicit bias, transgender issues in the workplace, the nature of whiteness in contemporary America, sexual violence and sexual harassment in the Me Too era, and the importance of diversity in legal hiring and in the litigation process. And for those efforts in the last couple of years, the NCADA has received awards from Lawyers Weekly, an award that it shared with the advocates, and also from DRI. Second thought, while nothing has changed about the importance of professionalism and civility, these troubling and different times also give us a fresh opportunity to renew and deepen our commitment to those values. For me personally, one of the silver linings of this time has been learning more than ever about the lives of my colleagues, opposing counsel, and clients. We have seen each other's homes, pets, and children on Zoom calls. We've shared how current events are affecting our work and our families. And through those conversations, I've been reminded again and again that you never know what someone else might be going through. You never know what hidden struggle might be going on in their lives. And I think it's true now that everyone and every system, including the judicial system, is operating under a stress, a strain, various constraints that weren't there before. So given that, this is really the best possible time to rededicate ourselves to taking the high road, turning the other cheek, and assuming the best about each other, even when we're on the opposite sides of the V. It's really not a hard thing to do, and the truth is that we're all going to need that consideration eventually from opposing counsel. I think this is also the best possible time for us to give the legal profession a good name. If you think about it, our profession is really built around helping other people navigate the complexities of life and the legal system. In light of all the disruption that's going on around us, there's never been a better time to do that work. So however long these times last and whatever new normal emerges on the other side, I hope we'll continue to realize the goal that our associations agreed on back in March, and that when we do look back, we'll be able to take pride in how we treated one another and how we did our part to support the judicial system. Thank you, and I'll now turn the floor over to David Henson from the North Carolina Advocates for Justice.
Thank you, Isaac, and thank you, Chief Justice Beasley. The March 30th memorandum that Isaac referenced sent from both of our organizations segued into a joint CLE held on April 17th, which I believe was the first joint CLE event hosted by our two groups. Speakers at that CLE included Judge Paul Ridgway, Wake County Trial Court Administrator Kelly Myers, and NCAJ's John McCabe and NCADA's J.D. Keister, where part of the message delivered was encouraging attorneys to handle their cases with a spirit of cooperation and the realization that everyone is dependent on one another. Now, at the same time those efforts were coming to fruition, Chief Justice Beasley was busy creating the COVID task force, which involved members from all aspects of the legal system, including judges, court personnel, court clerks, DAs, public defenders, the North Carolina Association of Defense Attorneys, and the North Carolina Advocates for Justice. Not surprisingly, John McCabe and J.D. Keister were also asked to serve on that task force and representing both of our organizations again. And if you happen to watch any of those meetings online, you would have seen our two delegates working collectively and collaboratively. When at times some of the other groups may have had a little more discourse with one another, but our two organizations in particular were really able to tackle some tough topics and reach consensus on key proposals that impact all of our practices and client interests. I think I would be safe in saying they certainly did both of our organizations proud in how they handled everything. And I believe we all are waiting anxiously to hear the final direction from Chief Justice Beasley when she gets to that point. I would also like to briefly highlight some of NCAJ's own internal efforts in recent years to promote diversity and inclusion from within. Back in 2017, NCAJ launched a diversity and inclusion task force with the goal of developing a comprehensive diversity and inclusion statement. That work then morphed into a plan which strongly encourages CLE programming chairs to consider diversity of speakers at all seminars across our organization. And at the same time, we began tracking the metrics of those efforts so that we could monitor our forward progress. To help facilitate greater diversity, we've compiled a diverse speaker database for chairs to draw from when they're developing programming. And we are continually pushing to expand this list so that we can offer a wider range of speaker options for CLE chairs. And similarly, this year, NCAJ also launched a monthly curriculum of webinars designed to educate members on how racism, sexism, and other biases impact the legal profession and how we as practitioners can better represent our clients who face systemic bias in the court system from judges and juries and the community. And this program will extend a minimum of 12 months so that each of us begins to think about diversity and inclusion not as a reactionary response each time national headlines capture our attention and emotions, but instead as a regular, organic part of each of our regular lives. Now lastly, NCAJ has been working to advance and protect our diverse members at the state bar level. NCAJ was very vocal in 2009 with the State Bar Ethics Committee, working to seek the addition of language to the preamble of the ethical rules designed to protect members from discrimination in the bar rules. And those efforts failed back in 2009, but we've renewed our efforts again in 2020 now that this issue is back before the committee yet again. And we encourage each of you all in attendance to weigh in with the State Bar and give your opinions and thoughts on the importance of all of that. Further, NCAJ has expressed support for the bar appointing a subcommittee to study the issue of whether to adopt the ABA Model Rule 8.4G or some version thereof. And to assist in that progress, NCAJ has formed an internal committee to study this issue and gather feedback from our members and determine what position as an organization we will be taking and then to follow through with that position. And as a final matter with the bar, we've also affirmed with the Board of Continuing Legal Education our support for their evaluation of diversity and inclusion training as part of the annual continuing legal education requirement. So in closing, on behalf of NCAJ and the NCADA, we appreciate the opportunity to be part of this important seminar today. And we, both of our organizations, will continue to work hard towards greater professionalism and diversity in our respective organizations. So, thank you, Mel.
David, I can't thank you and Isaac enough for what you're doing. Your comments were terrific, both of you. We thank you for being here and for the efforts that you've already expended and that you will continue to work on as we go forward. Thank you so much. Next, we have as a presenter a lady from Missouri, Dana Cutler. Some of you heard her about 6 or 8 months ago at the State Bar when she was invited to speak. And it was one of the best CLE presentations I'd ever heard. When we decided to do this program, I contacted her to see if she would agree to participate in this program, and she agreed to do so. I think you will be very impressed when you hear her. I'm looking forward to it, and I know that each of you are also. So with that, I'd like to introduce at this point Dana Cutler.
Good afternoon. Glad to be with you. I need to share my screen. So as soon as we get that available, we can start.
My apologies, Dana. You are now a co-host and you should have that capability.
All righty. All right, I hope you see surviving the onslaught of 2020. Is it up, Trudy?
We do.
Okay, great. Well, you know, let me just tell you a little bit about me and a little bit about why I love North Carolina. My husband's family are North Carolinians. My mother-in-law grew up in a little town called Ahoskie, North Carolina, up in the northern corner. My beloved brother-in-law and sister-in-law live in Raleigh, Durham. And as my mother-in-law would tell me all the time, North Carolina is God's country. And I, through my marriage with my husband, fell in love with North Carolina as well. So when I get to come and speak with you all and share with you, I feel like I'm coming home just a little bit. And so I wish we could all be together, but we're gonna make this Zoom work anyway. So 2020, wow, who saw this coming? No, none of us. And you know, this is kind of the calendar that comes to mind when I think about 2020. We started off with this year that we were looking so forward to it. Of course, I have to throw in there my Kansas City love. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl. All was right with the world. And then we just kind of spiraled. And while we are in September and the fires in California, we don't know what's coming in October, but I think that there's more. No telling what's going to happen in November. And my husband feels assured that Godzilla will show up in December. So with that, you know, we need to do some things to get ready for 2021, but this year has been something else. I think we all had a vision of 2020 that it would be a year that we could look back and see more clearly. But what it really has become is every morning we wake up for a new damage report. And this is kind of my personal favorite. What biblical plague is coming up next? And she's looking forward to it. Is it going to be frogs or locusts today? Some folks see this as this year as just you could never know what's going to come. But I see it as an opportunity to get ready for 2021. There will be unicorns in our future. So how do we get from a nuclear place to unicorns in 2021? A 2016 study from the American Bar Association says that lawyers suffer from problem drinking. If you do a comparison, 15% of medical doctors suffer from problem drinking. The overall population is about 23%. And we top those levels at 30 and 35%. We suffer from roughly a third of lawyers say they feel depressed, suffer from anxiety, and they attribute this to their work. So not only do we have the pressures of everything that everybody else is dealing with, but we also have the pressures of being successful, trying to take care of our clients, trying to run our businesses. All of that could make this year a year that you actually implode. What is the effect of this? Well, just looking at US data overall, we've seen an increase in suicides, post-COVID, PTSD, substance abuse, depression. Everybody is hitting us too. And it's hitting us in an unusual way because we carry the burden of not being able to share some of the things that we're dealing with just because of the issues of confidentiality. But I would say to you, in the words of John Lewis, do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. And even though we are struggling, there is beauty in the struggle. Our struggle is not for just a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Don't be afraid to make some noise, get in good trouble, necessary trouble. So some of the trouble that we find ourselves facing is not necessarily all bad. And if you think about it, a butterfly really has to work hard to get out of that chrysalis. But look what we have when we get on the other side of it. And so I am encouraging, my talk with you today is, we may be in trouble, but what do we do? Do we keep it, do we treat it as bad trouble? Or is it necessary trouble to move us to the next level? And in fact, can some of the trouble that we find ourselves in today, could it actually be good trouble? So the first thing we had was the pandemic, and they have the unmitigated gall to want to threaten us with a twindemic coming this fall. And while we are mourning the loss of so many lives in our country and across the world, and we are empathetic and sympathetic to those who are suffering, the one thing that came from this is it put the whole world on pause. When have we ever everybody just stopped and thought about what was going on up close and personal? And this is important because it gave us an opportunity to focus on connections. It increased our appreciation and our gratefulness. It redefined what looks like home. Everybody's got a little niche somewhere where they can work. Technology's place in our life. What do we do with it? How can we make it work for us? How can we use it to make our lives better? It has us rethinking access. And when we rethink this issue of access, it's not just access in terms of to capital and to money, but we're recognizing that we have a whole plethora, a whole level of people in our society who don't have access to Wi-Fi. So their kids couldn't go to school virtually. Or we're figuring out, okay, these folks that we kind of just don't see, we really depend on those Walmart workers. We really depend on those people in the grocery stores. And so it has caused us to stop and take a moment and figure out what are some things that we can do differently when we get in what I call the after times. And I don't know that we would have ever taken that moment to look at these things in the way that we've done this year without the pandemic. I wish there was another way we could have done it, but I don't know that that's possible. We're well aware of the social unrest that is going on, not just in our country, but worldwide. You have the migration of individuals from one part of the world to another part because of climate change. We have folks fighting in Asian countries because of China's takeovers. You have people marching for equal justice in countries all across this world. And so as we look at that, as we look at those issues of social injustice on a worldwide basis, it causes us to pause and think about what is our impact on the planet. We really don't have a planet B. We can have a plan B, but we don't have a planet B. And when we were all staying at home, they talked about the cleaner air that we were having, the decrease in emissions. And as we look and we see people are having to leave their homelands because of the impact we're having on the earth. What is democracy today in the world? What does that mean to be a democratic society? And so we are taking this time to kind of figure that out and see our place. And what we really realize is what we do impacts everyone. Decisions that were made last fall and in early winter in China have impacted the entire world. The decisions that we have made in our country on a day-to-day basis have impacted the entire world. So what do we do as attorneys? What makes this better? What makes this different? And I think that we are uniquely situated to take these issues that we are now seeing, that we are now struggling with, that we are now facing, and pick up a piece of it and run with it. There are 30 human rights that the United Nations has agreed to that every person should have, with the goal of having peace, dignity, and equality on a healthy planet. Instead of just kind of rolling around and being sad or being depressed or being worried, if each of us picked up an issue and took it forward as only the way lawyers can do it, it would make such a difference, not only in our own lives and our own perspective of what's going on in the world, but it would make a difference in the world, a positive, a very much needed positive move and direction. I want you to watch this very carefully. You'll notice that the gentleman pulls the wires from the stun gun from his chest. Now I show you that picture because it stands in stark contrast to what many people particularly of color, experience with the police. I think most people of color, if they are watching that, know that that would not have been the outcome had it been a person of color chasing a police officer. And I think you have to look at the issues of the police and people of color. And I'm showing you Jesse Washington. He was lynched in 1916. He was a 17-year-old farmhand who was lynched in Waco, Texas. He was taken away from the police and lynched. There were over 10,000 spectators, including city officials and police, watched this. And many people took pictures of this and they sold them as postcards in Waco. These are examples of the issues that people of color have faced with the police that have come to a head today. I'm showing you pictures of folks over the last 50 years who were shot or beat by the police that were unarmed, ultimately, starting back in the late 60s. Many of them we're familiar with because we see them on the news. This woman was a 70-year-old woman in Atlanta, Georgia, where the police burst into her home and killed her. This young man was shot because he had a bulging pocket full of potato chips that he had just bought. And it goes on and on and on. And while people may say, I disagree, I don't think the police are bad, and I don't either, because part of my practice is defending police officers for excessive force. But there is an issue here, and there's a reason why that you have seen the unrest in this country culminating with George Floyd's death. And police, and we as officers of the court, we as lawyers who deal with the police, deal with the justice system, have a duty to stand up and help move this ball forward. We cannot continue to say, I don't see it. It is up to us to make the difference. And I know that we as lawyers can do this. We can talk about, in a real way, institutionalized, legalized racism and its impact. If we don't do it, our country will be destroyed by this very insidious piece of our history. And we are the ones that can move it forward because we can listen to each other. It's what we do for a living. We listen to both sides, and then we make the best argument. And that is so important for us right now. Implicit biases. I was so pleased when I listened to the list of programming that the North Carolina Bar has put on this issue, dealing with the issue of white fragility. White fragility being that we don't want to talk about race because it is so painful. But I would say to you, just like I said at the other meeting, that the more that we become comfortable with uncomfortability, the better we become at resolving what makes us uncomfortable. And this era of the pandemic and this year of social unrest, we as lawyers should be leading the way to bring our country together. We have to be the ones to say, hey, we've got to combat police brutality, excessive force. We have the role of educating the public on the role of the police. I know every cop isn't bad. It would be impossible for that to be. But we have to help our communities and go into our communities and say, this is the role of the police, and this is how we can help them do their job better. Who better suited than us, than lawyers, to take the ball forward? Recognizing that there is a difference in how brown and black people and poor people are treated. And I really want to emphasize this issue of class, because all the cases that I defend or that I've defended thus far with the police have been excessive force issues on poor white males. So it is not just a black thing. It's not just a brown thing. It's a class thing. It's an expectation that these lives don't matter. And who, again, better suited than to make the argument that our justice system has to look like the promise that has been made than lawyers. I think that we have to talk about the before times weren't good for everyone, and making sure that the after times reflect meaningful and actual change. I think we understand better than anyone that no justice really leads to no peace. You know, we keep hearing fake news. This person can't be believed. This person can be believed. What are the agendas? And no one feels like they're getting the information. And so people look, I think lawyers are uniquely suited to teach about the importance of free press, to engage in civic education, and to demonstrate that our profession is built on listening to the other side. Bringing our truth together with our belief, that is the knowledge. And I think people look up to lawyers, even though they make terrible jokes about us, but people look up to us. And I think by us standing up and making known that even though we're going through these difficult times, and even though you may be inundated with misinformation, here's what this means. And this is how we go about sifting through it to get to the truth. It's an election year, and it's been quite an election year. So what can lawyers do to make it better? We can make sure that citizens participate. We can make sure that we protect the vote, and we can sign up for those classes to go in and protect the vote and the ballot. We can re-engage with our citizenry about the importance of voting. Doesn't matter how you vote, get out there and do it. People have died for this right, for you to get out and have the opportunity to speak and be heard. Frankly, people don't understand the Electoral College. People don't understand how can you have the popular vote and still lose at the Electoral College. Part of that is the fault of civic education has been removed from our schools. So lawyers are in a position to go in and help citizens understand what the election is, how to participate, why things end up the way they do. And if we have an extended vote count, lawyers should be involved in helping people understand what is going on. Of course, the economy has been tanked in many ways because of the pandemic, and we see joblessness, the economy is bad, people are worried. We are worried about our practices, depending on what you do and how you do it. But I would say to us that this is a time for us to be flexible. It's a time to reinvent oneself. It's a time to explore maybe other options. Looking at other areas of practice so that you can be viable in the coming seasons. This isn't a time for us to tuck tail and be afraid. Dr. LeBeer says the absence of a positive vision of your future can actually create depression over time. Recent research illustrates that how we experience ourselves in the larger world can impact a tendency toward anxiety and depression. The impact of a sense of meaning and purpose of one's mental health, having a sense of purpose and meaning, and focusing on your true self, you won't have as much depression and anxiety. So I think that taking these issues that we have been facing over the last year, whether it's economic, whether it's social unrest, here or abroad, whether we are concerned about the economy, using our skill sets to address those, even in a small way, will move us from this issue of being depressed, having anxiety, because then we have a purpose. And it's a purpose bigger than us. We need to be our own superheroes, whatever that looks like. If you're a Marvel girl or DC Comics, it doesn't matter. We need to become our own heroes. Once we begin to move out of our own worries and own concerns and start to address someone else's concerns, we find ourselves being free from the anxiety, the depression, and the worry. It puts us in a position to be ready for those unicorns that I believe are coming in 2021. Some of our great philosophers and people that we all look up say that we can make change, we can make a better place. It's in our own hands. We can gently shake the world. The best way to predict your future is to create it. We can't do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And at the end of the day, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I'm a firm believer that while we're facing so many different obstacles and issues, that it's how we approach those obstacles and issues, how we open ourselves up to have dialogue and to teach and to use our skill sets to bring others along will make all the difference in how we finish 2020 and begin 2021. So years from now, when my grandbaby, who just turned 14 months, and that's spoken like a true grandmother, the heart of my heart, when she asked me about 2020, we laughed about this. Years from now, we're going to be like 2018 was like this, 2019 was like that, 2021. Hey, you missed. No, we don't talk about that one. That I think will be our reality, but I'm hoping that we will find the inner strength, the intestinal fortitude, not to just look at our bad troubles, but look and see how we can take that bad trouble and make it good trouble and make it necessary trouble so that we can move the ball forward. That is my hope. That is my prayer. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mel, I've got you, you're muted. There you go, you're good.
Okay. Dana, thank you so much for coming back home to North Carolina to share those wonderful thoughts in these difficult times. I agree. 2020 is one we may not want to talk about in the future, but I hope that the lawyers in the United States will take your words to heart and to lead and to do the things that we are capable of doing to make this a better year. Certainly it is a challenge for all of us. Your thoughts and words were wonderful as always, and I can't thank you enough for being a part of the program today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and hope to see you all in real life real soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. The next speakers that we have.
Mel, can I interrupt for just 1 second? I think that we are, still waiting on Julie to join us, just so that you're aware. And I know Allison's on the call, but I haven't seen Julie yet, so I just want to make sure that we are good to go ahead and start with that. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted you to be aware.
Well, thank you. It's my understanding that she was going to be on or come in around 2 o'clock, and that Allison was going to go first.
Okay, that's perfect then. That's great. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware.
Yeah. So with that being the case, I will introduce at this point Allison Mullins, who's a member of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism, and she is with the Turning Point litigation firm in Greensboro. She is an outstanding lawyer, and we are so happy she's here. And then after she finishes, hopefully, we will have at that point Dr. Julie Wayne, who is a professor at the Wake Forest Business School and has written many articles involving work-life benefits and the behavior that each of us will at some point have to deal with. So with that, I'd like to recognize at this point Allison Mullins to go next.
Thank you, Mel. And I have texted Julie to let her know we're running a little bit ahead, so hopefully she will sign on in just a couple of minutes. And the way that we were planning to present today is I was going to talk for a few minutes, and then Julie was going to have a time for her presentation. Then we were going to open it up to questions if folks have any, or if not, we'll talk about some additional items that we thought of might be of interest. So for folks, if you have questions along the way, particularly in Julie's presentation, if you'll put those in the chat, we'll be keeping an eye on that so that we can make sure that we cover those. So I appreciate all the comments so far today, and it's certainly true that these are unusual times. No doubt that is true. We have unusual challenges that have been thrust upon us and are hanging about, and that fact creates a lot of uncertainty at varying levels between wonder and struggle and fighting. We consider what over will look like. What will this look like when it's over? And Dana very eloquently talked about the after time. What will the after time look like? And so when will it happen? What will it look like? There are numerous studies that are out there. Dana cited some of them, and there are plenty of studies out there about the mental health challenges during this time. The CDC reports that more than 40% of American adults have reported at least one adverse mental or behavioral health condition related to the pandemic. And those are just the people who have reported. The CDC reports that anxiety disorder is more than 3 times higher, depressive disorder and symptoms more than 4 times higher than it was during this same time frame in 2019. One psychologist in Sacramento remarked that our society is definitely in a collective state of trauma. The good news, if there is that, and I hope that there is, as Dana talked about, I hope that that will be the case, that we're all in this together. Even as we are physically separated, we have commonality in terms of all of the things that we are experiencing. And that is helpful because all of the studies about trauma show that it's helpful if you can go through it with somebody. And so I think one of the challenges that we have as lawyers and just as individuals is to make sure that we figure out how we can help our profession, how we can help our fellow professionals. Isaac talked about in his remarks at the beginning that we have had the opportunity to learn a lot of things about other people during this time. We have the opportunity to see their homes and to see different experiences that they're going through. And so that's actually a blessing of the things that we're experiencing, because we get to, even though we're physically separated, we have the opportunity to connect in ways that we have not had the opportunity to do before. And I appreciate what Dana said about positive takeaways from the pandemic, what the Chief Justice said at the beginning about finding the silver linings and doing more. Chief Justice Beasley said, we want to do more than just work past the incident before us. And I think that that is true, not just with respect to, well, I think it's true in a lot of ways for our profession in terms of issues that are facing our society, but also issues that are facing our profession. We are, of course, lawyers, and probably most everybody on this presentation are litigators. Our challenge is as a profession, is to pursue justice. And what does that look like? And a simple definition of justice that is apt, I think, is making wrong things right. And so how is it during this time that we can seek to make wrong things right, both collectively for our society in the various issues that we're facing, but also for our profession? Our profession is changing, whether it wants to or not, and we don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. And it's up to us to be able to create the positive outcome, even though it may look different. And you know, one of the things I'm very hopeful about is that there will be positive takeaways, and we'll have innovators, lawyer innovators, who are going to look into circumstances and situations and say, you know what, we learned from the pandemic, and we learned from what we had to do during the pandemic, that there are some ways that we can address issues that are better than what we did before. We've long talked about the fact that litigation is expensive, and that creates access to justice problems. So are there ways that we've learned during the pandemic that we can do things more efficiently, that we can do things in a more cost-effective way? Are there things that we've learned about inclusiveness and barriers that we can figure out through things that we've had to experience now, that that there are ways to be more inclusive, that there are ways to eliminate a lot of those barriers? In terms of being able to be connected, are there ways that we can innovate in order to be connected, even if we're not always able to be in the same physical space? So I think that is just a really a good opportunity that we have from the pandemic, and I'm hopeful that we can learn from one another and take the best ideas and come together, whatever over looks like, that we'll be able to come together and we'll be able to mine the things that that are positive, that are actually good developments. We think about when the discovery rules changed, and we sought to change the justice system at that time by increasing discovery so that we could figure out how to settle cases before they would go to trial. And that had a lot of good effects, but it also had some negative effects in terms of creating greater cost. And so are we learning some things now that can help us go the other way and create greater access through more efficiency through lowered costs? It's not the only thing, but it's one thing that we may be able to take away. I think we need to look for the lawyer innovators, the people who have had the opportunity to consider these issues and who will be able to come together and to be able to say, these are things we've learned from the pandemic. These are things that we can take away. These are things that we should keep, even if we don't have to keep them. And I encourage all of the folks, as you're going through your daily lives, as you're going through your practice, to be able to have that hope and to look for that hope of the ways that we can make things better on the other side. I think that perhaps Julie is on now, and if so, I'm going to pause for her to take over, but if not, then I'll go through a few other issues.
I am here, Allison. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Yes.
So thank you guys. Thank you guys for having me. So I don't know if there's a possibility of my sharing my screen. If not, I don't need it, but if so, if the host could turn that over to me, that would be awesome. Is that possible?
Julie, I just made you a co-host, so you should have that capability now.
Thank you. So can you guys see my screen? Give me a thumbs up, Allison, if you can see my screen. Awesome. Okay. So I don't know if there's, been the opportunity for anybody to introduce me, but I am a professor at Wake Forest. I'm a mom of 3, actively involved in my community, and I've been studying work-life balance for about 20 years. So they say research is me search. And so what's really interesting is this kind of early in my career, someone actually made the comment, isn't that kind of anti-business research? Like this notion that you want employees to have balance, like aren't they taking away from their involvement in work in order to get balance? And so it kind of has evolved from that to a lot of people talking about balance. I mean, in the Atlantic, Anne-Marie Slaughter wrote about how women can't have it all. We've got work-life balance for dummies. We've got Sheryl Sandberg telling us to lean in. Bloomberg says lean out. Even dads want family time. And so this notion around work-life balance was one that was fairly popular water cooler conversation. But I think even the people who thought maybe they had this under control, then the pandemic hit. And it has really kind of rocked our worlds collectively, literally, figuratively. And so clearly there's the physical health concerns around the coronavirus. There's financial stress associated with stock market volatility, and job insecurity. Even people who still have their jobs are working very differently than they've worked in the past. There's new technology to navigate, doesn't always work the way that it should. And then for many working parents, their school-age children are at home. And I don't know, for those of you who are on the call who are experiencing that, but that's a huge challenge. And, it was hard enough to be a working parent when my work day ended at 5 or 6. And I could go home, help my kids run their errands, help with homework. They could go to bed. I could go back to work, whatever. Now we are literally working simultaneously. And so this notion, whatever semblance of balance that we had, for many of us, it has gone out the window. And so we're renegotiating those kinds of things. And so that's kind of our current reality. And so realize that some of what I'm going to tell you is stuff that we have known from the evidence on work-life balance. And other parts of it is fairly cutting edge that we're kind of examining and exploring as we go. So I'm going to talk to you for the next 35, 40 minutes about what do we mean when we talk about work-life balance? What do most of us mean when we talk about it? What do we not mean? I'm going to hit on some myths around balance, which I think is helpful for us to figure out what is it? If we want to get it, what is it? And then we will talk about how do you think your balance is right now? And what are some strategies for how you might get more balance? I put that in quotes, air quotes, because as you'll see, I think balance is a bit of a misnomer. If you have questions or comments, please jump in the chat. I think Allison's going to monitor the chat, and we are very intentionally leaving time towards the end of this session. If Allison or I can answer questions, but I think just as helpful is to hear you guys talk among yourselves around some ideas as well. So jump in, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, we will take some questions at the end. So in terms of what do we mean by balance? Okay, so take a look. I think sometimes this is the image that is put out there, right? Balance is the key to life. And here we have this elephant perfectly balanced, right, on this beach ball. But if we were actually, it's a snapshot. It's a moment in time. And in that moment, that looks maybe like the elephant has it all together, right? Perfectly balanced, not falling, not rocking. And the message out there is this is the key to life. But if we were watching this in real time, first of all, this is a fairly impossible feat. And if we were watching it real time, the elephant is going to be rolling all over the place. So maybe for a snapshot, we might catch it and it looks right. But the reality is there's constant movement, okay? And so I think that we actually think about balance in the wrong way. And one of it has to do with the part of speech that we use, because balance implies a noun. It implies this state of being that we can get and maintain. And that just really isn't reality. In reality, it's a verb. It's a constant evolving process of balancing, right? There's never a state of balance that we get and we keep it. But it's a constant process of going back and forth and trying to kind of have harmony among the different roles in our lives. So I use the term balance because that's a popular term of balance, but let me tell you what I think it does not mean. You know, I was thinking about you guys are attorneys and you think about the scales of justice, right? And so that's how often we think about balance. And when we first started studying balance, I mean, that's kind of what we thought about. Like, here's a scale and I got to get things just like this. Work and non-work have to be equal, right? And so if I'm out of balance, that means one is more than the other. And so balance means equality. And that is not what balance means. Balance does not mean equal time, equal satisfaction between your work and personal roles. It also doesn't mean having it all and having everything at once. And it doesn't mean you're a rock star in everything that you do. And what balance looks like for one person may look very different for another person. So what is balance? Balancing, this verb rather than this noun, it is really this sense of harmony or fit that all your roles are coming together in a integrated, harmonious way, okay? And generally, where that comes from is what we call authenticity, right? That you are investing the time and energy in your roles consistent with who you are, how important those roles are to you, how much you value those roles, right? So if community involvement is really, really important to you, then that's a critical aspect of balance for you. But for others, it's not going to be an important aspect of balance. And so where does balance come from? It comes from this sense that I'm investing in my roles to the extent to which they're important to me. It's also negotiating and meeting realistic expectations across those valued roles. So realize here, we're not talking about Wonder Woman or Superman, right, in every role, but that we do have realistic expectations and that we're meeting those expectations. So balance is not equality. It doesn't look the same for everybody. It's much more about, are you authentic in your roles? Do you feel good about how you're investing in your roles, consistent with who you are and what's important? And are you meeting expectations? So if we think about that's what balance is, then that gives us some clues on how do we get more of it. And so I want to talk about that, but I want to start with, why does this matter? Because again, there was this myth back 5-10 years ago that balance is good for people, but it's not good for the firm, right? And that in order for somebody to get more balance outside of work, that meant less time, energy, engagement at work. And we've done some research on this, and what we did was we asked hundreds of people, and we assessed their balance, and we gave both their spouses and their supervisor surveys. And we said, okay, supervisors, tell us, how good of a citizen is this person? To what extent do they go above and beyond the call of duty? And how do you evaluate their performance? How good of a performer, how good of an employee is this? We also ask spouses that, right? And so if we buy into this notion that balance is bad for business, what we should see is the people who tell us they're really balanced, that their bosses should say, yeah, they're not a great performer, and they don't go above and beyond the call of duty, right? That's not what we found at all. What we found is that when employees tell us that they're more balanced, that it is associated with their greater sense of well-being. People who are more balanced have better mental and physical health. They're more satisfied in their job, more satisfied in their family. They're more satisfied in their lives overall, okay? So our firm should care because of mental and physical health related costs if people don't have balance. But it goes above and beyond those employee level factors. It actually affects employee attitudes and employee commitment to the firm. So people who are more balanced in their organizations and in their lives, they're more engaged. They have greater commitment to their intentions to quit within the next year. And as I said, based on supervisor and spouse ratings, they're actually better in their jobs, not worse, right? So this is not just a touchy-feely, feel-good kind of thing that firms should do out of the goodwill of their hearts, right? There's real bottom line ROI kinds of factors associated with employees having better balance. So how do we get that? Now, I'm going to focus on two different areas, okay? One is, what can leaders do in organizations? What can firms do? And then we're going to spend the rest of our time on, well, what can you do? Because you may or may not have control over what your leaders do, but it's important that if you are a leader in a firm, if you're a partner, if you're supervising and managing other attorneys, that you are very well aware that you are the number one factor in the firm that predicts your employees' attitudes, right? And policies, we've got what's called, from a research standpoint, we call it a meta-analysis. We took every study on balance that's out there. We're in the process of getting this published. And there was only one factor that we measured that did not predict employee balance, and it was firm level policies. Policies don't help, and that's not to say that we shouldn't have them, but the number one factor is factors of the job and the leaders. So we actually collected data during COVID, and what we found was the people who fared best in terms of their work-life changes throughout COVID had compassionate leaders, people who display empathy, people who care about and ask, how are things at home, people who model balance in their own lives. They realize that they set the tone for what it looks like to have a healthy work-life balance. They are mindful of when they're sending emails and what message that implicitly sends about people's availability during typically off-hour times. There's two kinds of support that typically we can provide as supervisors. One is emotional support, and certainly showing that you're caring and concerned. Caring is important, but it's also important that we are figuring out ways to actually kind of balance is typically when our resources exceed our demands, okay? And right now, what we have is we are asked to do more with fewer resources, less time, less support, less money, and we're working more hours, many of us, right? And so it's not enough just to say, yeah, I'm sorry, like I really care. That is helpful, that is important, but also help employees prioritize their work. Right, and we're going to talk about this, and a way for you to get balance is to prioritize your work. But also to what extent can you offer scheduling flexibility? Obviously, people are working at home. To what extent can you help employees manage their boundaries? I had an employee recently who said the best gift that her boss gave was to say, turn off your phone at night and weekends. I don't expect you to be available. There was this implicit assumption that she had to be available 24/7. And she's like, it was just such a gift to know that my boss didn't expect that of me. So those are some things that we know, particularly during the pandemic, make a difference in people's experience of how they're managing work and family. So let me stop there and just see if there are any questions pertaining to what firms or leaders can do, because we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about what you can do individually. So any questions? I'll give you just a second to put it in chat. You can put it to me or you can put it to everybody, whatever. Okay, sounds like we're good then. Not seeing any questions pop up.
Julie,
So,
I'll ask you a question. I've heard a lot of people say that they're having challenges in trying to figure out how to make sure that people, particularly younger attorneys, are included in things that they would have otherwise been included in because they would have physically been in the office. And since that's not the case, what are some ways to help create not just boundaries in terms of when to start, but or when to stop, but boundaries to make sure that we keep people included? And just, I'm not going to try to answer my own question. I'm interested in what Julie has to say about it, but you know, I think we're all experiencing challenges in establishing healthy boundaries. We have the same boundary issues that have existed for a long time, like with connectivity and with client demands, expectations by ourselves or others about availability, just what we were talking about, being available 24/7, and economic concerns with billing or billable hour pressures, any type of those pressures. We have those same challenges, but they now seem to be exacerbated or playing out in different ways. For instance, with folks who are posting that they have remote learning children that are demanding attention, we are seeing a lot of folks who need to give some attention during their what would otherwise be their sort of normal work day to family members or to other activities because they are working from home or have other needs to address. And that has caused boundary issues in terms of not being able to stop at the end of the day. So we're seeing folks who are working, you know, much later in the day because they're sort of trading off time from earlier. And I think these are just real significant challenges, and hopefully Julie will come back and talk to us a little bit more about that. When we don't have physical separation anymore from work and home, when they are blended together, you know, taking a vacation, what does that look like during this time? So when we look at things about how do we create these healthy boundaries, I mean, one of the things that is a challenge for all of us is now defining again what our boundaries look like. What is it? How are we going to, in the context of this sort of new normal that we're living in, at least for this time, what do we want those boundaries to look like? It used to be that we could say, when I leave the office, I'm going to leave everything at the office and I'm going to go home and have family time. And when I go to work, I'm going to have work time. That's not possible for a lot of folks at this point. So how are we going to define it? And it's different for everybody. But we have to make a decision about that and put that in place. And then we have to be disciplined about it. Just like we were disciplined for folks who created a boundary of, when I leave the office, I'm going to leave the office, I'm going to leave work there. Now, whatever your boundaries are, however you define them, that's a place where you now have to be disciplined to enforce your own boundaries. And we have to be determined about it. And just like we were before, I'm not going to give on my boundaries when just because there's something that's tugging at me. We have to have the same kind of determination. I think that another issue that is a challenge for all of us is how to redefine and maintain connection among people. For a lot of us, physical connection, being in the same physical space, being able to go to meetings and conferences and other things where we got to connect with people in what I call the before, the after, and the in between. If we were all physically in the same space, we would have already had enriching conversations today with our colleagues before the program started, after when it's over, after, at that time, as we're all getting ready to leave, and then in the in-between, between different parts. And so how do we preserve the before, the after, and the in-between? You know, we're all trying to chat and to try to keep some sort of connection, but it's obviously not the same. And so this is a place where I talked about innovators before. We're going to need some innovation in how to make sure that we can maintain those connections. And we're all going to have to also be more vigilant to make sure that we try to maintain connection with each other and take care of each other, because that's important for a lot of folks. It's important that physical connection that we no longer have, or at least don't have right now, is a big thing that is missing for a lot of folks. It's created a lot of feelings of loneliness and isolation. And it's important for our profession, because a big part of our profession is the collegiality and the professionalism that comes from having those connections with one another. And so I think another thing that's challenging about that is that we don't know whether we're navigating this for the short term or for the long term. We don't know what that looks like in the end. But if we can come up with some really good ways to try to maintain that connection, whether it's in smaller groups or in larger groups, but to have that connection, it's going to be important.
Yes, unfortunately, thank you all for your flexibility and your patience. I actually think that it is probably a computer issue and not an internet issue. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of walk you through the points that I wanted to make, and I can certainly, if people are interested, I can share some slides later. But I think the takeaways from what leaders can do are to ask two questions. One is, how are you? And the second question is, how can I help you? What do you need from me? And so Allison had asked about connection kind of in a virtual world. And what we're seeing from the research on leading in this kind of virtual remote working environment is the leaders who are having regular check-ins with their people are the ones that they're people, and they tend to be doing the best. And so having regular check-ins, how do we include, younger, more junior associates, is to be very intentional about it. Again, if we're a leader, we're checking in with them regularly, providing opportunities during work hours for connection and relationship building, or happy hours, those kinds of things that might normally happen after hours. And so one of the things that I did hear when I was popping in and out, and I'm not sure people knew that I was there, is that one of the typically people differ in the extent to which they keep boundaries around work and non-work, firm or very kind of soft, and crossing those boundaries. And often the people who segment those different areas of their lives tend to feel more balanced. And right now those boundaries are very blurred. And so, one of the strategies that we can do as leaders is to kind of help people craft stronger boundaries so that they can disconnect from work. So, sometimes, especially in high pressure, high performance industries and occupations such as the practice of law, there's kind of this mentality of just go as long, go as hard as you can, and kind of the warrior mentality. And what we actually see, and this is outside of the pandemic, but what we see is that people need to recharge, they need to recover. And so if we measure people from day to day at work and at home, what we find is the people who disconnect from email, who disconnect from work at night, actually have more energy and are more recharged and more engaged at work the next day. So this mentality that we should be working 24/7 is just counterproductive. And so one of the things that I talked about is that balance is fundamentally about aligning your time and energy in roles that are consistent with your priorities. And so the way that we can assess our balance is to say, how important is work to me?
how much of my time and energy am I spending in work, and then do that for each of the areas of our lives that are important to us: home, community, but don't forget yourself. Because often what we find is we invest so much in our career, we may invest so much in caregiving for children or elderly parents, or even being asked to volunteer in the community, that the one area that really gets depleted is the self. And so balance is not about equal focus, time, and energy in each of those roles, but instead, if work is really important to me, am I spending a lot of my time and energy at work? If home is really important to me, am I spending a lot of time there? And so balance is about the time and energy you're giving to a role matching how important it is to you. So what you can do is think about each of those 5 areas of your life: work, home, community, and self. And if you have 100%, how would you divide it across those 5 categories? It may be equal for you, and if so, it'd be 20%. It could be work is 40, home is 40, community is 10, and self is 10, right? But what you want to think about across those 5 roles is how important, and if I took 100%, how would I divide it up? After you do that, you want to think realistically, and not over the course of a day, but over the past several weeks, months. What percent of my time and energy would I say that I'm giving to each of those areas of my life? So what percent of my time and energy is going into work? Well, work is important to me, so it's an important element of my life. So I would say it's probably, if I divided it up, let's say it's 40% importance. But lately, over the past 6 months, it's probably gotten 70% of my time and energy. So I don't feel balanced there. My home is also important to me. Let's say it's 50%, right? But what I'm giving to that right now is 20%, and there's 0 to me, right? 0 to community. And so it's the gap between how important an area is and how I'm investing in it that leads to feelings of imbalance. So what we have to do to close that is think about, well, how do I spend time and energy more consistently with how important that role is? And there are a couple of things we can do. Some are basic time management principles. Just evaluate, where am I spending my time? Am I spending it in the areas that I want to spend it? Am I spending it in those important areas, or am I spending it just in urgent areas? So really evaluating time wasters. What is busy work? What are time wasters, time distractors? Am I drowning in email? What are some ways that I'm not spending my time in where I should be spending it, which is on important activities, not just urgent activities? So really looking at, how am I spending my time, and realizing the basic time management principle that we spend 80% of our time to achieve 20% of the results. And so what we need to do is look at, we spend 20% of our time to achieve 80% of our results. So what are those few vital tasks that really are generating 80% of my results? That if I focused in and spent most of my time on that 20%, then that's where I'm going to get the biggest bang for my buck. And then there's 80% of my time, maybe on trivial or unimportant things that I'm spending a lot of time on, but it's not as important to achieving results. So figuring out, what are the priorities? What are the few tasks that I have to do? And so then Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, the first is to be proactive, the first habit. The second habit is to begin with the end in mind. And so one of the things about balance is really, Stephen Covey tells people, not in the context of balance, but just in the context of leading yourself and crafting your life. He says, begin with the end in mind, and literally he means the end. He has people think about their eulogy and what people want said about them at their eulogy. And so when you start thinking about your destination, great leaders know where they're taking a group or an organization. They're thinking into the future. And then management is about executing day to day on the decisions and activities that will ultimately lead to accomplishment of that vision. And so we can apply that same principle to achieving balance in our lives, is thinking into the future at the end of our career, at our retirement. What do we want to have accomplished? Certainly in our career, but also in our personal lives. There's a great Harvard Business Review article by a professor who's actually passed away about in the past year. His name's Clay Christensen, and it's called How Will You Measure Your Life? And I highly recommend it. And he talks about our yardsticks, and he said, how will you measure success? And he said, nobody, gets married thinking there'll be one to get divorced. Nobody went into business school saying, I want to take down a company, as his classmates at Harvard ultimately did at Enron. Nobody says, I want to end up in jail. Nobody says, I want to be estranged from my family. And so what he noticed at his college reunions and MBA reunions was that there were people that's the reality, because they had overinvested in their careers and underinvested in their personal lives. And so we just want to be intentional about how we're spending our time and energy. And once we know what our priorities are, we put those on our schedule first. We schedule those 20% of activities that are going to drive 80% of our results. And, but often what we do is we prioritize what is on our schedule. And Covey says the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. And so part of what we can do to get more time in the right categories is to say no to things that don't fit our priorities. And Covey also says you have to decide what your highest priorities are and have the courage. And once you know what your yes is, you can pleasantly, smilingly, but unapologetically say no to the other things. That doesn't mean that it's easy necessarily, but when you're saying you have a bigger yes burning inside you, then it's easier to say no. And right now, part of what we can do to get greater balance and time in the right categories is to say no to those things that might be less important and or don't fit our priorities. The other thing is we have this myth of Superwoman, Wonder Woman, Superman, and a key aspect of kind of dealing with particularly the stress of this crisis is realizing we don't have to do everything. Even Batman as a superhero had Robin. And so we have to be willing to delegate, and to the extent that we can. And certainly we can think about this in our career, but we can also think about this at home. Something that occurred to me yesterday as I was trying to work simultaneously with teach my seventh grade math is that's probably not best for either of us. By the end, he was in tears. I was almost in tears. And what I realized is, you know what? I need to find a tutor. Because the tutor is going to be more effective and our relationship is going to be better, and he probably won't be in tears because somebody knows how to teach him this better than I do. And so I think just asking for help rather than trying to do everything, looking at what we're doing at work, and are we the person who has to do those things. Another way to get balance is to look for synergy across roles. Sometimes we're neglecting ourselves. We might be neglecting friendships. It's very, very difficult right now because of social distancing and other limitations, but those social support is huge in terms of quality of life, managing stress, and achieving balance. And so thinking of ways that you can actually get synergy across your roles. Can you exercise with a friend? If you like reading books, but you haven't had time to read books, can you start a book club at work? Looking for ways to have synergy across your roles rather than having them so isolated that literally in order to give time to one, you have to take from another. Instead, look for ways you can spread time out across your roles. In addition to time management, there's energy management is also really important. So I said it's aligning your time and energy with roles that fit your values. But Stephen Covey was all about time management. His third principle is putting first things first. And that's what we should do is, again, that's investing our time in the most important, not just the most urgent things. But we also know, again, this idea that time is fixed, time is limited. And one of the ways that we often cope with excess work is we don't sleep and we don't exercise because those things take time. But the counterproductive piece of that is when we don't sleep and we don't exercise and we don't take care of ourselves, is mentally and physically we get drained. We don't have the cognitive capacity nor the physical energy to do our work. And so rather than just focusing on time management, we want to manage our energy. And so, you know, what we know from kind of biological rhythms, that means knowing what is your best time of day. Maybe if that's when you do your most important work. If you're juggling kids and helping them do school while you're trying to work, you carve out your best time of the day, maybe in the morning, to do your work, and then carve out time in the afternoon when energy tends to wane, and that's when you wouldn't be as productive at work, that you can carve out that time for them. Take frequent energy breaks, go outside, walk around. All of those things are important to maintaining your energy. Another thing that helps with balance is being mentally and emotionally present. We might be physically in one space, but we're actually thinking about a client or a problem at work, and that actually reduces our feelings of balance. And so one of the things that we can do is try to be more mindful and present and engaged. And one of the barriers to that is technology. And so what we can do is put structures and systems in place to try to minimize the extent to which work intrudes on family or family intrudes on work through technology. And so it might be putting your phone away during dinner, taking your email off for the weekends and putting it back on, whatever is manageable. But often we overimpose assumptions about how we're going to, how needed we are, right? And so the last piece of balance is meeting expectations. And I think Allison talked about the fact that we're having to renegotiate expectations. And so having conversations with the people in our lives, whether that be spouses or other partners in our non-work roles, our supervisors, and really asking, what are your expectations of me? Clearly communicating what the realities in terms of your demands are, and then creatively brainstorming together possible solutions for how you can both meet your needs. One of the biggest things we can do during this time is not lower expectations to the point that they're unacceptable. We should be striving for high quality in all of our roles, but not perfection. We also need to realize there is a point of diminishing returns. And particularly for less significant tasks, we can lower our expectations and show ourselves grace. And it's okay to ask for help. So some of the questions I would encourage you to ask yourself is, what task at work or at home am I doing that either doesn't need to be done or could be done by someone else, or that I could be doing more efficiently? How can I spend more time on matters that are really important, not just those that are urgent? How can I find synergy across my roles? What are some things I can do to better manage my energy? Have I stopped exercising? Have I not been getting enough sleep? What are some things I can do? How can I be more present at work, at home? And what conversations do I need to have to negotiate expectations that I feel like I can achieve? So I know that's a lot, and I know it's really fast, and it's strange because I'm talking on the phone and I can't see you or hear you. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and questions, and I'd really love for you guys to share what you're doing that works. So I can't see chat, so Allison, if you could help read them to me, that would be great.
Yeah. So Sandra posted that she's been loading and running her dishwasher more often instead of trying to hand wash small loads, and that's a way that she's saving time. And Julie, I had a question. I wondered, have you seen in your research generational differences, or is this something that everybody is sort of dealing with the same across the board? I realize that's a very sort of broad question, but I just wondered if if there are any generational differences that you're seeing.
In terms of the pandemic or in terms of balance?
I guess I was specifically referring to balance within the pandemic.
Okay, so I don't have any generational research on balance within the pandemic. What I can tell you is that younger generations, they expect work-life balance, and they are attracted to firms where they think that they can achieve that. So it's much more important to them when they're job seeking than it is to older employees. Clearly, what we do know, though, is probably some of the age categories, life stage categories, where balance is the hardest is in the caregiving. And so particularly people with younger children, although now I would we're collecting data now on, people with school age children. But I mean, what we know from the past literature is that people who have kids at home during the day or in childcare, those are the ones who tend to have the hardest time. But now that's probably going to extend. I mean, once kids got into school age, then we saw things kind of, it was still challenging, but not quite as challenging. And my guess is that's kind of recurring because now they're not leaving home to go to school. And then clearly you have the sandwich generation where people are simultaneously caregiving for their children and their parents, and particularly in a pandemic. I mean, in my small work area, I've had 2 colleagues who each of them, their father has passed away of COVID. My mom had a heart attack at the very end of February, and it's probably due to have COVID because she was very sick and was diagnosed with a coronavirus at the time. And so, that's very stressful for people. Is often if they need childcare, oftentimes they'll call on grandparents, and grandparents may not physically be healthy enough to be exposed to kids. So that's that's the best answer I can give around generational things is, I think it's tough for everybody, but for different reasons.
I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for us to learn. I mean, even pre-pandemic, there were lots of things that were written about just what you said, that younger generations wanted greater flexibility. And one of the things that was often spoken of was work at home. And so I think it's going to be a great opportunity for us to learn as we are working through whatever the end of this looks like, whether that, whenever that may come, and even during this time, and recognizing too that this is not the work at home that everybody was hoping for. It was a forced work at home.
Right.
And that obviously changes things, but an opportunity for learning in terms of how does the work at home experience meet the expectations of the folks who had longed for that experience and longed for that opportunity, and how does it not meet the expectations? How has it been, and are all of the things of not meeting the expectations pandemic related in terms of, having children at home, or being now not choosing to stay at home, but being forced to stay at home. So I think that's an opportunity for us all in terms of that type of learning coming out of this experience.
I mean, one of the things we've always known around virtual teams compared to what we call co-located or in-person teams is it's harder, and you have to be much more intentional about communication, conversation, relationship building, checking in and creating that, not just between leader and follower, but among the members of a team. And so, one of the things that we see in terms of the remote work is people are missing the interpersonal interactions, and people who would typically characterize themselves as introverts and not the most sociable at work are still craving some degree of that more than they thought that they would. And so, but yes, I mean, this is not just a national experiment in remote work. I mean, there are many, many things that occurred simultaneously that are making that especially challenging. So I think that while there are some advantages, I think we have to be quick not to conclude that it's a failed experiment if it didn't work well, because it's not just working remotely, but it's working under intense conditions, and not having the normal social support and social and physical outlets that we typically have to put balance into our lives, help us get balance in our lives.
Julie, when you talked about setting expectations and sort of renegotiating expectations, do you have any strategies? I just think it's been a while since I was a new lawyer, but when I was a new lawyer, one of the ways that I sort of negotiated the expectations of the firm where I was and the people that I was working with was because I could physically be in the same space and see how others operated and see what those expectations were, and then get to the place of me establishing my own boundaries within whatever those expectations were. But for new lawyers and for people who are supervising new lawyers, how do you sort of in a healthy way set and establish those expectations, understand what they are, and get to a place in both parts of that equation, both the new lawyer or the younger lawyer and the supervising lawyer, in terms of trying to negotiate those kinds of expectations when you're not physically in the same space and you're not seeing those folks and may not be talking to them on nearly as regular of a basis?
So I think, we do look around at others to understand what norms are, right? And so I think you're right that there's not that opportunity. And so I do think that, there's a lot more responsibility, I guess, on the leader. So one of the things that I think all leaders should do is have relationship building and expectation setting conversations, right, on a regular basis. And so hopefully all leaders are checking in with their people on a regular basis. How are things for you? What can I do to help? But also conveying kind of, here's my expectations, right? But also in a dialogue. And I think if we approach every one of those conversations as shared and collaborative problem solving, we all want the same goal. Individually, we want to be successful. We want to serve our clients well. We want to help the firm, right? And so the question then becomes, let's have a collaborative problem solving conversation around how we can work together to achieve those goals while also dealing with the realities of what's going on in the context of the pandemic. And so I think it's just an opportunity, one, if we are leaders, to initiate those conversations, to say, hey, look, and approach it from the mindset that we are working towards the same goal, right? And so if we're working towards the same goal, like what does that look like? And maybe as the manager, I have to realize that it may not look like the way I want it to look or the way I think it should look or the way I would do it. But again, what we're seeing from the research we've collected so far is having empathy and compassion and understanding. And that's not to say that people don't have high expectations for work, right? They do, but realizing that maybe that happens in a different time frame than it happened previously. That, maybe that person's working 8 to 1 and then they're helping their kid at lunch for 1 to 2 and time is being shifted. And so just being open-minded and collaborative and creative around, here's the work that has to get done, but let's work together to figure out how you can do that in a way that works well given all that you have going on. And I do think as new lawyers, we have responsibilities to initiate those conversations or to ask for those conversations. It just takes more courage given the power differential.
Yeah, I think communication's always been important in all of these aspects, and it certainly very mature communication very quickly is something that we're all going to have to work on, and communicating in ways that perhaps we didn't or weren't as comfortable communicating before. And as you say, it requires some courage and some boldness all around, frankly. Also, right. It's difficult for, because it adds something to the to-do list. On both sides of that equation, it adds something to the to-do list. We just got Trudy had posted a comment from Lisa Holmson that said she's made efforts to call people, use FaceTime and Zoom, text and send uplifting pictures, and send cards and letters to others. Makes her feel more grounded and stay closer to those she misses, which is wonderful. And there are lots of folks who have that kind of gift of just hospitality in that context. But for people who don't, it's and it's not their natural proclivity, it creates another sort of thing on their to-do list.
So absolutely. And one of the biggest reasons people don't delegate or they don't have these important conversations is because of time and a feeling of urgency, and that something in the moment is more important. And I think of it when I taught my kids to tie their shoes, right? So every time my kid came to me to tie their shoe, the quickest thing for me to do in that moment was to tie their shoe for them, right? Or if they spilled their milk, the quickest thing for me to do in that moment was to clean it up for them, because I didn't have much time. I'm always in a hurry, right? But by tying their shoe for them, it's going to take me a lot longer in that moment to teach them, and multiple moments. It's going to take me longer right now to teach them how to tie their shoe. But ultimately, I'm going to save time in the end, right? Because ultimately they develop the independence, they develop the skill. So not only does it save me, it costs me time now, saves me time later, but if I'm not giving my kid that skill, ultimately I'm handicapping them, right? And that's the same thing that we do to our people. If we don't delegate to them, if we don't trust them, if we don't give them responsibilities and we take on all those responsibilities because it's faster, then ultimately we're handicapping them, and we may be sending the signal like, I don't trust you enough. And probably it's coming just a lack of time. The other thing that I think about, and I was thinking about this, you know, when you were talking, Allison, is that if you think of a pitcher, right, where you're just constantly, it's full of water and there are all these cups around and you're constantly pouring out, right? If you don't do something to fill your bucket, it's going to be empty. And so you just have to figure out what fills your cup, what fills your bucket, you know, so that you don't dry yourself up and there's nothing left to give.
Yeah, and I you know, as you were talking, Julie, I thought that when we invest in people, whether it's training to tie your shoe or training to practice law or whatever else, it's rarely efficient, but it is, as you say, one of the most effective investments that we can make. And so it is definitely a challenge during this time. It's always been a challenge, but it's a different kind of challenge during this time to make sure that we continue to invest in the people who will benefit from that investment, because the long term, that investment pays dividends for not only the lawyers who are making the investment, the lawyers in whom the investment is made, but also the profession as a whole, which is really of vital importance in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the best leaders that I've ever had, they've been the ones who've taken the time to know my strengths and weaknesses, figure out where I want to go, what my goals are, and then help equip me with that. So I would say that's always important. I think it's especially important right now that leaders are checking in, having those conversations, and continuing to grow and develop their people, even though it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And it's very hard to do when we're all struggling with our own demands in and outside of the workplace.
Well, as we have said along the way, and as Dana and other speakers have commented on, I think that we have what I hope will be tremendous opportunity to learn from this time, the things that we can give up that needed to be given up, and the things that we need to try to figure out how to preserve in a different way, the places that we need to renegotiate, as you talked about boundaries and just balance as more of a verb than as a noun. And so I'm hopeful that organizations like the ones that are involved here, the Advocates for Justice, the NCADA, the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism, and other organizations can take, can mine the gems that their members are learning, that we're all learning. And as I said in my remarks at the beginning, to innovate so that we end up not just going back, even if we have that opportunity, but that when we get to whatever the new normal looks like, that we'll have the opportunity to move forward with the benefit of the learning that we've had, the benefit of the good experiences that we can draw from this time, so that we can be more effective on behalf of our clients and our profession, and certainly for ourselves and for the next generation. So
well, and you know, the people who are most resilient are the ones who look for meaning and purpose in the difficulties that they face. And that's really what you're talking about is, I mean, I know the past 6 months have been probably the most overwhelming work-wise, you know, in a number of years. But at the same time, I've actually grown in my skill and my craft in ways that I wouldn't have had to do. I mean, we've been talking about online education for years. Not all of us were raising our hands saying, yeah, sign me up for that, right? And yet in a matter of a week, we went from completely unexpected, untrained, from fully in person to fully online. And that's usually a process that takes us a year to develop an online course. And we did it in a matter of days. And so, but I feel like I have honed my craft in a way that, having been in the college classroom for 25 years, that I haven't needed. I've done it, but in different ways. This is like completely transformational. And so I think, you know, I will be more effective. I am more effective in the classroom because of what I've gone through in the past 6 months. And so I do wholeheartedly agree with you from a, you know, just somebody who kind of is resilient and bounces back through this very difficult time, is what is the meaning? What is the purpose? What are the lessons? What are the positives? And how can we ultimately come through this, not from just surviving, but actually thriving and growing on the other side of this?
Well, I think this certainly, I bet everybody who is participating in this has a story similar, that there's something that they've had the opportunity to experience. For me, one of the things is remote depositions. I had always, and frankly still believe, that you get more in a deposition when you're in the room with somebody. But I've also come to recognize that by necessity, because we've had to do depositions that way, that there are some that we just don't need to be together for. I think of a couple of depositions I've had in the last month, one that the witness was in California, another the witness was in Arizona. And if I had to go to those depositions, that's pretty much a 3-day circumstance between the travel there and back, and then the time for the deposition. And the stress that's involved in that, the expense that's involved for the client. And you know, I've reflected after those depositions ended that we were able to be just as effective doing it remotely. And so those are opportunities to learn. And I talked about at the beginning, Julie, you may have not been on, but I think that there are opportunities for lawyers in terms of access to justice issues and lowering the cost of certain types of events for litigation, which I think is a tremendously beneficial lesson that can come out of this time. So I suspect that everybody who's here and folks who are not here have those kinds of things that they've been able to learn and adapt and reevaluate what's really important and what's really vital in terms of our daily work. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to collect that and collectively move forward, keeping those good things as we emerge in whatever way that emergence exhibits itself.
Yeah, so I think that's what we can look forward to, is coming through the other side of this and taking the lessons of the positives with us. So thank you all for your time. I think you guys have another session coming up. Thank you for your flexibility, for your patience as I experience technical difficulties. I hope that even though I couldn't see you guys and share slides in real time with you, but I hope that there's at least some takeaway that you can have, that you can apply now, that will truly make a difference in how you feel about the balance between your work life and your life outside of work. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Julie and Allison. We've all had technical difficulties in the past, so we felt for you, but we do thank you so much for your thoughts and your ideas. We'll all benefit from that greatly, and I thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. We will next move to Two lawyers that are going to talk with us, and oftentimes in presentations, the last presentation or so is by older lawyers who've been around for a while. We thought that it would be good and different in this case to invite young lawyers to do, in effect, the closing. So we have invited Dana Asante-Smith of Parker Poe in Raleigh, which is a larger firm, and Cole Phelps, who is a sole practitioner in Plymouth, North Carolina, much smaller than Raleigh. But we think that we will enjoy hearing from them, hearing them talk about the challenges they face as new lawyers and how to lead. So I will turn it now over to either Dana or Cole, whichever one wants to go first.
Thank you, Mel. I'll go ahead and go first. I didn't really get Cole's permission, but I will assume I can go first.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Mel mentioned, my name is Dana Asante-Smith, and I, along with Cole Phelps, have the distinct pleasure of leading this session, this final session of this CLE presentation, and it is titled Lawyers Need to Lead. And we're particularly excited to lead this session because we are really living in a time where there's so much going on. There's so many challenges, but there are also so many opportunities for us to really refine our role as leaders in our communities and also in our profession. So today it's our hope that we can have a very frank and transparent conversation about how we can step into these challenges and step into these opportunities as we consider what leadership can and should look like, again, not only within our communities, but also within our profession, particularly surrounding matters of racial unrest, inequities, et cetera. So it's important for Cole and I, as we embark kind of on this discussion and this journey with you all, that we emphasize that this presentation is what we want to make more of a conversation, right? We don't want it to be a situation where we're talking at you. So we want to make sure that everyone feels as much as possible that you have the opportunity to engage. And we will explicitly provide such opportunities. We want to start by giving a little bit of background about ourselves, just so you understand where our perspectives come from and why we are who we are and why we believe what we believe. So as I mentioned, my name is Dana Asante-Smith. I am an associate at Parker Poe, Adams & Bernstein in the firm's business litigation group. Prior to joining Parker Poe, I was an assistant district attorney with the Wake County DA's office. And before that, I was in law school. I grew up in Wisconsin, but I was born in Ghana, very distinct and different areas in the world. But that is kind of the background for geographically and culturally where I came from before coming to North Carolina as an undergraduate at Duke University and graduating with my law degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And with that, I will pass it on to Cole.
All right, I'll be brief in my introductions and just say good afternoon. I'm excited to be here and hope that you can feel the energy that Dana and myself are going to bring in this frank discussion. I'm in Washington County, North Carolina, a population of a whopping 12,000. There are 3 lawyers in my county, and I happen to be one of those 3. The other 2 are over 70 years old, so soon I may be the only one. But I want to say that and no offense to those who are over 70, I see you pulling down your screens and looking at me over your glasses. But let me just say that I grew up here. I was born and raised here. I came back here and opened a law firm straight out of law school in 2013. I've been practicing for 7 years. But I think it's important that you know from my background that when I was in school here, I graduated with 24 students in my class. And I was the only white male in my class. And that shaped my approach to issues that we'll discuss today, such as race, racial unrest, and really influenced how I approach those particular topics. I also serve as the chairman of the Washington County Board of County Commissioners. I have served in that role for 8 years and finishing up my 2nd term. I can tell you that today in America and in North Carolina, I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I'm not Black, but my heart hurts for Black people. And so today, as we navigate through this conversation, which may be uncomfortable to some of you, and we hope it is, because that's the only way that you can go beyond those barriers is by being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And so we're going to push you through some barriers in the next 15 or 20 minutes that we have, I think. But that's a little bit about me. And Nana, let's get into this conversation.
Absolutely. Cole, I appreciated kind of when Cole and I started kind of putting together this presentation, we talked about how important it was to be transparent and clear, not just with each other, but with you all about where we come from, who we are, and how that influences, again, our perspective. And especially as a Black woman and as a Black mother, certainly the kind of hurt that I feel, but also the hope that I feel differs from Cole's, right? But ultimately, we know that we both have a commitment, and we know that many of our fellow lawyers and colleagues have a commitment to really identifying and continuing to challenge ourselves to say, what can we do to actively and proactively be a part of the solution? And being a part of the solution to everything that's going on in this world, even if it's not happening right at our doorsteps, literally and physically, is to start by having these kinds of frank conversations. So we want to start out by acknowledging that we know that plenty of us practice law and work in courthouses or in offices that vary very differently depending on where we live or where we work, right? And especially in the age of COVID, the ways in which our courthouses are operating or our businesses are operating look very, very different. So we want to acknowledge that and put that forth as the foundation to say, we know that all of these solutions may not necessarily manifest themselves in the same way in every single county and every single city. But there's still something that we can each do to be proactive about being part of the solution. So we want to start by acknowledging how these practices differ, even in an urban versus rural setting. So Cole's gonna kind of talk about what that acknowledgement looks like.
Sure, and so I need everybody to wake up. We're in the home stretch. We're bringing it home, right? I mean, you've been sitting at it for, since 1 o'clock. We're in the home stretch. I need you to tune in, and hopefully you'll take something away from this. Lawyers need to lead, right? That's the topic of this discussion. And so when we talk about urban versus rural, I'm in a rural area. And so what does that look like compared to where Nana is? Well, guess what? Nana has court daily. Where I live, we don't have court daily. We have 5 counties and the judges circle through those 5 counties. So it may be that one county only has court once a week and another county has court twice a week, but we don't have the opportunity to go in front of a judge every day. You talk about geographical distances. Nana can make it from the 2nd floor to the 3rd floor to the 4th floor to different courtrooms. I have to drive at least 30 minutes to get to the next courtroom, to the next courthouse. I know earlier we talked about broadband, and the Chief Justice has really been pushing WebEx hearings and all of that across the state. Well, that's great in urban areas, but guess what? In rural areas where I live, we don't have access to broadband internet, so we can't do WebEx hearings. And then you talk about resources, anger management resources or DWI assessments or community service opportunities. People in urban areas have those, whereas my clients in rural areas do not have those, and the resources are far less. So I think it's very important that you realize that there is a distinct difference in urban versus rural areas, and that takes us into the second part of what we're going to be spending the majority of our time on, Nana.
Yes, and so I think it's important for all of us to note, and we certainly do, that while these very stark differences exist in where and how we practice law, that doesn't preclude the responsibility that we have, again, as members of our community and as members of this illustrious profession. So we really want to start out by kind of having a discussion about why folks think that it's difficult or uncomfortable for people to talk about issues of race or racial unrest. Anyone willing to kind of volunteer to share what your thoughts are on that, even via chat, or if you want to raise your hand? Just a couple, because they don't know how. Yes. Okay, Maria, thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's Maria offered that one of the reasons that it's uncomfortable for people to discuss issues of race is that they don't know how. And I see Dina. Dina, thank you, because folks then have to admit their personal biases. Another response.
Nana, are you uncomfortable right now? It's getting kind of hot, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of hot talking about this topic.
We're not uncomfortable yet, but
okay,
also,
but we're getting there.
We're getting there.
Okay.
Someone also mentioned that they don't want to be perceived as racist or don't want to risk a peer being racist. And we really have to kind of unpack that. And I certainly think we're going to do that throughout this, but just a couple more. People feel that they'll be judged on one side or rejected or dismissed on the other side. Another person says people are quick to judge and jump to conclusions and don't want to risk saying the wrong things. These are all very true. And I think Cole and I very much share these experiences, again, given our different backgrounds and experiences, that these are all constantly true, right? These make it difficult to have these conversations and difficult to live, because Dina just mentioned something important. She said for people of color, the fear of losing their job. That's very real.
Let's be frank. That's not something I have to worry about as a white man or a person who's white.
Ever, right? But especially in these, and I'm glad Cole brought that up, because especially given recent events, there are many times that I've had to say to myself as a Black woman, especially a Black woman who is working at a law firm, Nana, don't say too much, or Nana, be careful about saying that because it might result in so and so. Not because Parker Poe isn't a great firm filled with great people, but because these are the kinds of realities of fear in which, for example, people of color have to live in and live with. And people like Cole recognize, look, he doesn't have to worry about that. Not saying Cole doesn't have any concerns, right? Or issues or, hesitations concerning discomfort, but our levels and degrees and type of discomfort are very different, right? So thank you all. And I see a couple more coming through in the chat, and we appreciate you all being so engaging. But the reality is it's an uncomfortable topic for many, right? And sometimes people expect that, oh, just because Nana, you're a Black woman or someone is a person of color, it means discussing race is an easy topic. And that's not true, right? Because there are implications and considerations to be made on either side, but we have to be honest about what those considerations are and be honest that those considerations affect us very differently, right? My fears and hesitations do not mirror Cole's, and there's a level of privilege he has to have those discussions that I may not always have in terms of transparency. So Cole, I'll let you take it from there.
Sure. So let's shift gears a little bit and we'll come back and turn the temperature up just a little bit hotter, okay? I think we're maybe about 70 degrees right now, but we're gonna get it to 100. So let's talk about right now just the role of lawyers and their perspective. So, lawyers have a huge and tremendous opportunity and duty to be involved when it comes to responsibilities in a period of racial unrest. And when you look throughout history, when you look through changes in communities, when you look at how things have progressed, it's always lawyers at the forefront. Always, always, always. And lawyers are always at the heart of it. And so, Nana, a question I want to ask you is, why do you think that more lawyers are not involved today in a time of racial unrest?
So I think my response to that is admittedly not something that's only limited to lawyers, but we're here talking as lawyers. So we have to focus on our opportunities for kind of challenge and growth. And I say it goes back to, I see Dina said the same thing in the chat. For example, there's a fear of losing your job, right? Whether you're Black or white, there's a fear for some people that if I get involved in these issues, if I say I want to maybe defend protesters or something like that, that may not be received well by my firm. But there are also practical issues, like Lisa said, people don't want to lose business in private practice, right? People see issues of race, and they are and can be, as being so polarizing that it almost feels like you have to take a side. And if you take the wrong side, your business may suffer, right? Or your friends may not regard you in the same way, or people on your social media might attack you. So I would say that there are a wide array of reasons, none of which justify the duty and job we have to do, not just as community members, but also as lawyers. So we don't want to act like these fears and fears of apprehension aren't real, but we really do have a responsibility here to have these conversations, do this work, and challenge each other. But I would even offer taking it a step further. Non-people of color have a greater responsibility as people who live within privilege to do what you can as well to hold folks accountable when we're having these conversations and living these truths within our places of work, at the dinner table. And Cole's going to talk about all of that. But we also have to be comfortable with realizing that when we're talking about issues of race, we are not on equal footing, right? In terms of how we experience those issues, we're not, right? So we have to be able and comfortable to recognize that even though we have these fears and apprehensions about not doing more as lawyers, we have to challenge ourselves to do better, to know better, and do more than what we're already doing.
And I see a comment, Nana, that says, which is so true, that there's an assumption by white people that any one person of color can speak for other people of color. And you know, as an attorney at a large law firm, you're one of a few attorneys of color. And so I know a lot of times I've been in rooms where people will ask the one person who's of color, well, what do you think? You know, what do you think when it comes to people of color? And you don't speak for all Black people, do you, Nana?
Sometimes I think I do in my head, but I don't.
So, I mean, I think we talked about, you know, why are more lawyers not involved in this important work? You know, I think people said that they're scared. You know, maybe they'll say the wrong thing. I think a lot of times white people may not know what to say, or may not know how to say it, or how to address it, or how to speak up. Maybe they genuinely want to speak out and do well, but as you saw in the chat, it could impact their business. Well, at what point does doing the right thing trump your business?
Right. And Cole, I want to jump in for a second because someone brought up an important point in the chat. It's important that everyone understand what white privilege is. And I apologize for not kind of being more explicit and transparent about that. But really, white privilege, I think, is best defined as a societal privilege that benefits white people over non-white people in various aspects of society, including socioeconomic access, access to jobs, politics, or social circumstances. So it's a benefit that kind of you can rely on and know, right, for the most part and largely, that, hey, it is unlikely that I'm going to be treated in a particular way based on my race, in a way that's going to be detrimental to me. So I would best characterize it as a societal privilege that benefits white people over non-white people. For example, someone said, white privilege is not having to worry when police stop you. I think that is excellent, right? And let me give an example, especially in the kind of within the scope of transparency. I feel like I am a law-abiding, I'm an attorney, right? I exist with that privilege. I'm law-abiding. I know what's going on. I used to be a prosecutor, blah, blah, blah. When I tell you every single time I am driving, when I see a police car, not because I'm making any judgments about that police officer personally, the presence of a police car alone raises my blood pressure and raises it tremendously, in that my mind begins skirting all over the place. And I start thinking of the many people who have come before me, my brothers and sisters who've come before me, who did not make it past a traffic stop. And I think to some people that may seem like, whoa, that is kind of an extreme reaction. If you're doing the right thing, it's going to be fine. Well, we all know, right, that doing the right thing or following the law does not give you an all access pass to living or making it past a police stop if you are Black, right? So there's some respectability politics in there, but that is kind of the reality of the fears and the hesitation that can sometimes be crippling, especially when I think about my Black husband, who's also an attorney, who drives around, and I worry every single day, right? Is he going to make it home okay? Is he going to be subject to some sort of circumstance because he's a Black man? And I worry about the very same for my 1-year-old son. And even with a 1-year-old son, this is something I think about regularly, and my 11-year-old stepson. So these are the kinds of thoughts that permeate the lives of so many people of color that I think is important to be transparent about, especially as Cole will start kind of taking us down the road of discussing exactly where can we start and what can we do to move from theory to practice as we continue to have these kinds of discussions. So Cole, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, and so before we move to theory to practice, I just want to say, you know, as a white man, when I get stopped by the police, I don't think twice about it. I mean, if we're being frank, right? You get scared when you get stopped. I have plenty of friends who get scared to get stopped. I don't think twice about it. I continue, you know, going about my business as if I would, and that's because that's, you know, the skin that I was born in. And so let's talk about theory to practice. So what can lawyers do during this period of racial unrest? We have to do more. We've already said that. So what can we do? The first thing is going to seem very basic, but we can talk to our family and friends. Every one of you on the CLE know that you have people in your family that say things that they shouldn't say. Call them out. Call out your mom, call out your dad, your aunties, your uncles, your partners, your, you know, colleagues, your people you work with, your family members. They say racist things. You know they do. We all know that everybody has their own perception. They all have their own prejudices. We all have those. But if you don't say something, then you're really co-signing their racism or their comments. And so you have a duty and an obligation to call those things out. Because if not, it's dangerous and it's unacceptable. And so that's the first thing I'll say is you got to call it out. Nana, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah. Cole, I appreciate you sharing that, because Cole and I have had frank discussions about, look, Cole knows amongst his family members, he has experience or know of people who have said things that, whether it's explicitly or implicitly, right? Again, which can both be dangerous, that those are very real. And that's why accountability is so important, because what we say really does have such deep implications for what we do. And Cole recognizes, especially within his privilege as a white man, he has the opportunity to sit around a table and let someone know that or challenge someone, whether it may be an aunt, a cousin, whoever it is, about maybe their racism, or maybe it's even implicit bias, right? And both are problematic, and both offer opportunities for growth. Yes.
And I want to just jump in. A lot of times, in my experience, whether it be in judges' chambers, whether it be in a back room with other white lawyers, people of the same race, at least in my experience, feel like they can talk to you because you're a white man or because you're of the same race. They can talk and say things that they wouldn't say if you were in the room with us. And that's totally inappropriate. And for you to stand there and allow that to happen speaks to your character. And so we have to shut those conversations down when they come up, whether that be in the courthouse, whether that be in the courtroom, in the back room, in your law firm, wherever it may be, the break room, you've got to shut it down.
Right, Cole, and that's a tough reality, right? That's a tough reality, but it is a reality nonetheless, because someone mentioned, what about calling out clients? Your clients aren't exempt, right? We're not saying that it's not tough, but your client isn't exempt. I would offer that judges aren't exempt, right? As a former prosecutor, I dealt with many circumstances. And again, problematic behavior doesn't always have to be explicitly racist, right? It can come from implicit bias as well. And there are many instances in which I look back on my short time as a prosecutor, and I think about all the times that I saw behavior or heard words from a judge or a lawyer that was clearly and unequivocally deeply rooted in implicit bias or racist behavior, and I said nothing, right? And that is guilt at an unprecedented level for me, especially as a Black woman. But what I've also recognized in those circumstances is it is not my obligation alone, just because I'm a Black woman, to call out such instances and hold people accountable. Someone mentioned that sometimes it's as easy as saying, or it can be as simple as saying that was inappropriate with a firm smile and moving on. And that's a responsibility that cannot fall on Black people or people of color alone. It has to be within our white communities as well, amongst white people, and there actually has to be a commitment to leadership in that area by white people, right? Because white privilege exists, and it serves as the foundation, again, when we're talking about that benefit, for why people act and say the things that they do with such ease. So Cole, I think what you said is very important. And again, I want to reemphasize, whether it's your client, a judge, your colleague, your aunt, we have an obligation around the clock, right? Because suffering doesn't end is not just 20 hours a day for people of color. It's 24/7. So that means accountability must also be 24/7. And kind of with Cole starting out with mentioning the talking to your family, friends, and beyond, I want to also move on to an opportunity directly within the profession, right? Yes. We push a lot, whether our firms or individually or the bar, push the need for pro bono work. And I think it's very important, right? It is the bedrock of why we do what we do. And it is the bedrock of being a productive and kind of contributing attorney. But I want to push us all to be more intentional about the kind of pro bono work that we do. For example, seek opportunities with groups or organizations in your area that are doing work to directly address instances of racial unrest or racial inequities. Seek opportunities within those entities, not just so you can support the work that they're doing, but so because you can also be intentional about how you are using your pro bono time, right? It is a great learning experience first and foremost. And I'll also tell you that these organizations, for example, Emancipate North Carolina, are doing great work around these issues. We're not asking you to reinvent the wheel. We're asking you to recommit and reimagine what your pro bono work looks like and how you challenge yourself as a lawyer to become more informed about and also provide assistance in these communities while understanding your privilege, understanding your role, and knowing that this isn't about you, it's about what you're giving back and what you're learning as well.
So I think that, Nana, we're again transitioning from theory to practice and what can we do as attorneys. And we first talked very basic, talk to your family and friends, your coworkers, call them out. Number two, we talked about pro bono work. Number three, let's encourage people professionally and in the community to host race-related conversations. That's one thing that my law firm is doing, is that we're hosting race-related conversations because we know that it's real and we know that, it's not a taboo topic. It's something that needs to be talked about. And the only way that folks can get comfortable with it is by talking about it. And so there's no limit to accountability. So challenge your law firm, go to your partner, go to whoever it is that's in charge of your law firm, or maybe it's you to say, you know what, I think we should have a discussion on race. Let's have a panel on race. Let's talk about putting together something where we can address these topics. Plan an event. We can't gather right now, but the conversation and the good necessary trouble that you heard earlier must go on. And so that could happen via Zoom. It could happen via WebEx, webinars. Have these conversations. If my law firm can do it, and I'm the only attorney here in Little Washington County, I know each of you can do it. And just imagine with the 219 lawyers that are on this call, if each of us did that, the impact that that could make across the state of North Carolina. How great would that be? I mean, the Chief Justice is doing great things and leading this state, and we have to follow behind her lead. She is leading us, and she is addressing these issues, and we have to address them. If not us, then who? Nana.
Cole, you're exactly right. And as I was also looking to, at the chat, as you mentioned, really, if not us, then who? We have to be creative, right? And we have to challenge ourselves in terms of what we can do to be a part of this solution, what we can do to take on or follow Chief Justice Beasley's leadership and the work of those who are kind of leading at the grassroots level too, right? Someone asked, what kind of work addresses racial unrest, right? So whether it's, you know, representing protesters or, you know, doing work in that vein, even helping to do work that addresses racial inequities is so important, right? So whether it's kind of getting involved in opportunities where a disparate number of people of color, let's say, may be getting evicted, right, from their homes, maybe it's going to be helpful for you to redirect your energy into areas where people of color are disproportionately represented, right? And these organizations that are doing the grassroots work have identified these areas. So it may look like evictions. It may look like domestic violence protective orders. It may look like, you know, protesters. It may look like assisting with issues that arise within the school to prison pipeline. So those are just kind of some other examples of how this work can be done when you say, hey, what can I do? And I think it's just important to say, hey, what opportunities can I seek in which people of color are disproportionately affected? And maybe that's where I can use kind of my legal energy and time, you know, to do that work. So kind of, again, giving more concrete examples of what we can do. Intentional, again, efforts to engage in race-based or racial equity trainings, right? Not just diversity trainings, not just engaging in activities at your place of work that's, you know, have kind of very arbitrary conversations. Trainings, racial equity trainings that concretely and transparently address these issues, have discussions about them, and challenge you to think about whatever preconceived notions you may have as we discuss racial inequities. So those trainings are important. And I will directly suggest the Racial Equity Institute, REI, does a phenomenal race equity training that I think is worth, you know, consideration in terms of folks looking into, not just individually, but for your places of work. I would also say, I think we are in a unique position in that folks often say, well, what can I do? What can I do? And being a proactive and productive part of these race-based conversations and actions don't require you to just donate money, right, all the time. Don't require you to necessarily say, hey, let me protest. Those are all great. But there are other opportunities like long-term investments in entities that are, again, not only doing this race-based work, but in businesses and institutions that are led by people of color. For example, it may be worthwhile for you to say, if you work at a law firm, HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, are going through a particularly difficult time in the midst of COVID and in general, right? Because we as a country don't value those institutions as we should, and maybe say, hey, maybe I can invest in this institution as they work to get back on their feet, maintain accreditation or whatever it is, by providing these pro bono services to help them evaluate areas that they might be experiencing challenges in. So I think it's important for us to also consider what a long-term investment looks like in businesses, in institutions that are led by the hard work and representation of people of color. Cole?
Yeah, and so we have given you kind of 4 different ways you can shift things from theory to practice. There are many other ways. We don't have unlimited time. I wish we did. We could engage you in a whole lot of other areas that need to be engaged in. But one of the things that I do want to do as I close out my part, and then Nana will close out hers and we'll turn it back over, is I'm going to put in the chat a quote. I just finished reading the book, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. I don't know if you've read that book, or if you haven't, I would encourage you to go to Amazon today and order it. The movie is amazing as well, but the book is so much better. It says, finally, I've come to believe that the true measure of our commitment to justice, the character of our society, our commitment to the rule of law, fairness, and equality cannot be measured by how we treat the rich, the powerful, the privileged, and the respected among us. The true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned. We are all implicated when we allow other people to be mistreated. And that is a quote that I have blown up. I've given it to all of my employees in my office. It's a quote that I have hanging up right above me. It's one that I read every day to remind myself that we are privileged. As lawyers, we are looked at as privileged people. And, you know, this, what we've talked about today as far as a period of racial unrest, this may not be your reality, and it's not my reality, but it's somebody's reality. It's your coworker's reality. It's your friend's reality. It could be one of your family members' reality, your client's reality. And so we have to do more. And so please, 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 if you don't get anything else from this presentation today, I urge you, as a white man who sees this happening every day, please do more when it comes to the period of racial unrest and your oath as an attorney in the state of North Carolina.
Thank you for that, Cole. And I will wrap up my portion by saying this. I have a lot of hope, and I know there's a lot of hope to be had across our country and within our communities at the local level. But I also want to say, in a moment of, again, with my theme being transparency, that as a Black woman in America today, I am tired. I am overwhelmed, both physically, emotionally, and mentally. And while that is mine to own, I think that if we as people, as lawyers, as members of our community, are really committed to each other as human beings, merely as human beings, we really have to commit to being better and doing better. And I think that means in every step of what we do and in all that we do and all that we are, we have to center people of color. We have to center the voices and experiences of people of color and say, look, this is not about, we as white people, not me, have to be willing and able to center people of color in conversations, in practice, because we want to be heard, we need to be heard. And that needs to happen not just in conversations, but in practice. So I challenge everyone to look at what leadership looks like at your firm. Look at what leadership looks like in local politics for you, right? Even at the national level. Look at who or what is happening in your world and in your communities, and commit yourself to doing what you can within the scope of all we've discussed and more. Do what you can to help lift up and center people of color. I think that kind of empowerment is so important. And I think we really have a duty, right, as a country and as people, to make sure that we're doing that in every way, shape, and form. It is not a monolithic approach. It doesn't only have to manifest itself in one way or another, but we have to be creative and committed to doing this hard work. No matter how difficult it may seem, no matter how daunting it may seem, if we really want to become the society and country that we say we are. We're not there yet, and there's still room to go and to grow, but I do believe that we can do this work and have to do this work, again, both as individuals and as members of our illustrious profession. So thank you all so much again. And we look forward to keeping this conversation going in many respects, and really appreciate the opportunity from Chief Justice Beasley and Mel Wright for allowing us to join you today. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Nana and Cole. Great presentation, really was. I had intended to say something in ending this that dealt with professionalism, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to let everybody leave this with what the two of you said. It was fabulous. And we're going to keep talking about it. But I thank you so much for what you said. I thank all of our presenters for the program. I thought it was great. And I hope to see you all again soon. But thank you so much for your comments. Trudy, I want to be sure everybody that's sending in these messages has an opportunity to do so. I hope we don't.
Absolutely. I will keep the call open, and
Yes.
I'm actually going to save the chat so that I can reference back to it. So.
Yes. Yes. Anybody who's still on that wants to make a comment, please send in that comment to the chat room now.
Yeah, that'd be great. And just once again, thank you to the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism for bringing together NCAJ and NCADA and to Lawyers Mutual for sponsoring today's program. We are greatly appreciative that we were able to be with the support of those two organizations to be able to offer this as a free CLE to both of our members. And it was very, very poignant and very timely with all of the presenters that we have today. So thank you to our presenters as well. And I hope that everybody has a wonderful rest of the week. And thank you, Mel, for all of your help too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Trudy.